You know, that feeling, right? That little buzz in your pocket letting you know someone's trying to reach you.
Hmm.
Or maybe the satisfying resistance you feel when you press a virtual button on a screen, even though there's, no physical click.
Yeah, that little thump.
Or the rumble in your controller as your car spins out on a virtual track.
Yeah?
That's haptics. And, for a long time, we thought of it as just simple vibration.
It's just a buzz, yeah.
But what if that simple buzz is just the very shallow surface of a deep, rich dimension of touch that's rapidly being added to our digital lives?
It's such a fascinating evolution. You're right, the initial perception is just vibration, but the sources we've pulled together for this deep dive paint a picture of haptic technology becoming, well, incredibly sophisticated, expanding its reach far beyond those familiar applications. It's really about adding nuance, information, and even emotional depth through touch.
And for this deep dive, we have quite the stack of material. I mean, we're looking at market analysis straight from ID TechX, giving us the big business view of where haptics is going.
Right, the numbers.
We've got academic research diving into how haptics impacts our emotional responses, specifically in complex virtual reality scenarios like, crowded spaces.
That crowd study is fascinating.
Yeah. And there's a detailed look at haptics in gaming from Tech4 gamers, exploring immersion, realism, and performance.
The fun stuff.
We've even dipped into a real-world Reddit discussion among competitive gamers, debating if haptics is a help or actually a hindrance in high-stakes play.
Ah, the competitive angle. That gets interesting.
Plus, we've got a study on gamepad ergonomics that frames haptics as a critical human factor and a piece reflecting on the future trajectory of this entire field.
It's a really good mix. This collection is perfect for understanding haptics from multiple angles. We see the technology itself, the massive market driving its development, its impact on user experience and different applications like gaming and VR, and even that nuanced debate among users about its practical effects. Does it actually help?
Our mission today is to unpack all of this. We want to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge, the surprising facts, the key insights that show us where haptics is right now, how it got there, and where it's undeniably headed.
Right.
And, most importantly, figure out what this whole haptic revolution means for you, how it's changing your interaction with the devices you use every single day.
Yeah, from making those virtual buttons feel incredibly real and reliable to potentially changing how deeply we feel connected to virtual experiences, these sources reveal a technology poised for, well, some significant transformation.
Okay, let's dive in and see what these sources have to say.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's unpack this first question then. What exactly is haptic feedback, according to these sources we're looking at, beyond just that simple buzz we talked about?
Well, at its core, as the ID Tech X source puts it, haptic feedback is about adding the dimension of touch to electronic devices. Simple as that, really.
Okay.
It's the technology that allows us to feel things from the digital world, kind of bridging that gap between the virtual and the physical.
And like we started with, the most familiar examples for most people are, the vibrations we get from our smartphones for notifications or alerts.
Yeah, the pocket buzz.
Or the rumble sensations in game controllers that respond to in-game events. ID TechX specifically points these out as the prevalent, maybe older forms of haptic interaction.
Right. Those are definitely the entry points for many people. But these sources make it abundantly clear that the reach of haptics is extending dramatically. The ID Tech X report highlights several key areas where haptics is becoming increasingly important, often in ways you might not immediately think of.
Like in vehicles. You mentioned cars earlier.
Precisely. As the car dashboards become dominated by touchscreens, right? Tactile feedback becomes crucial.
How so?
Well, haptics can provide a tactile confirmation when you press a virtual button. So instead of having to look down at the screen to visually confirm your input, which takes your eyes off the road, a major safety concern.
Big concern, yeah.
You get a distinct little physical nudge or click sensation, something that tells you instantly, okay, that button press registered. It makes those virtual interfaces feel more reliable and, crucially, significantly improves safety by reducing that visual distraction.
That makes so much sense. It's about bringing some of the reliability and sort of the intuitiveness of physical buttons back to the flexibility of touchscreens.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. Another area ID Tech X points to is in laptops.
Laptops, like trackpads.
Yeah, exactly. Devices like Apple's MacBook trackpads have moved away from physical clicking mechanisms entirely. They use haptics, specifically a custom linear resonant actuator, or LRA, they call it the Haptic engine, to simulate the feeling of a click.
Ah, so it's not really clicking.
Nope, it feels like it, but it's all simulated vibration. And this allows for incredibly thin trackpad designs that just wouldn't be possible with a traditional mechanical button underneath.
So it's enabling new form factors and design aesthetics too, not just enhancing existing interfaces. It's actually a functional component in the whole design process.
Absolutely. It opens up design possibilities. And then, of course, there's the realm of gaming and VR, which our other sources get into really deeply.
Right.
Tech4 Gamers and the VR Crowd Study both emphasize how haptics dramatically adds realism and boosts immersion. It's about translating on-screen actions, environmental textures, or even, like in that VR study, complex social interactions in a virtual world into physical sensations you can feel in your hands or on your body, whatever the interface is.
Why is adding this tactile dimension so important for user experience, though? The ID Tech X article stresses that it offers serious user experience benefits. What makes touch so powerful in that context?
Well, think about how we interact with the physical world, right? We use all our senses, sight, sound, smell, taste, and crucially, touch. Traditionally, our interactions with digital devices have been heavily weighted towards sight and sound. Adding touch kind of completes that sensory loop. It makes interactions feel more natural, more intuitive, maybe more engaging. A tactile cue can provide feedback that's faster or more immediate than a visual notification sometimes, or it can simply make an experience feel more real or, grounded.
It has that physical confirmation.
Exactly. A layer of physical confirmation or presence that visual or audio cues alone can't always provide as effectively.
And this isn't just some niche technology for a select few, is it? The ID Tech X forecast for the haptic technology market is massive. US $7.1 billion by 2035. That's a staggering figure. It indicates serious industry investment and projected growth.
It really is huge. It signals that the industry recognizes the profound value and, frankly, the market potential of incorporating touch into our digital interactions. And the source points out a key driver for this growth. It's not just about incremental improvements in existing applications like phones and controllers.
Right, not just better buzzes.
No, it's significant adoption in new classes of devices.
Like those vehicle touchscreens you mentioned, or thinner laptops, or maybe entirely new categories of devices we haven't even imagined yet.
Exactly. Applications that demand more sophisticated tactile feedback than what basic vibration could ever offer. And this brings us perfectly to the next piece of the puzzle.
Which is where it gets really interesting. The actual technology behind the sensations. How has the journey of touch evolved from that simple rumble to something far more refined?
Yeah, this is where the ID Tech X report gives us a great historical and forward-looking perspective. For a long, long time, the undisputed old guard of haptic tech was the eccentric rotating mass motor, ERM.
The little vibrating motors you remember from, say, an old Nokia phone in your pocket? Or maybe those early PlayStation controllers before they had the built-in rumble packs, that kind of thing.
Precisely. The
Wow.
classic simple vibration. They work by spinning a small weight that's off-center on a motor shaft. This off-balance spinning creates vibration.
Simple physics.
Very simple. They were low cost and effective for basic alerts. But their feedback is relatively crude because the frequency and amplitude of the vibration are coupled, basically. Speeding up the motor changes both the intensity and the feel of the buzz.
Oh.
So you get one basic type of sensation that just varies in strength and speed, a single, somewhat generic buzz.
Right, just more or less buzzing.
Exactly. But then, starting in the mid-2010s, linear resonant actuators, or LRAs, began taking over. ID TechX says LRAs started displacing ERMs around that time and are now pretty prevalent in many applications.
Okay, so what was the big step up with LRAs? What made them better?
The major innovation with LRAs is that they decouple frequency from amplitude. Instead of a rotating motor, an LRA works by moving a mass back and forth along a single axis, using a spring and a voice coil, sort of like a speaker, but designed for motion, not sound.
Okay, moving back and forth.
Right. And because it's a resonant system, you can drive it at different frequencies to create different types of sensations, from a soft pulse to a really sharp tap, while controlling the intensity, the amplitude, independently.
Ah, so instead of just a buzz, you could get a distinct tap-tap, or maybe a more nuanced thump.
Exactly. And because the motion is linear, along just one axis, the feedback feels much more precise and refined. It's often perceived as a crisp tap or click rather than that general spreading rumble you get from an ERM.
Makes sense.
Apple's Haptic engine, which we mentioned earlier for its use in trackpads, is a really well-known example of a sophisticated custom LRA design. This technology allowed for more varied and precise haptic experiences, opening the door for interfaces that felt more responsive and less, well, generic.
Okay, so ERMs with a basic buzz.
Yeah.
LRAs brought refinement and variety with taps and distinct sensations. What's the new wave the sources mention is coming next, expected to really dominate the market?
Yeah, according to ID TechX, the trend is decidedly moving towards newer classes of haptic actuators. The two primary examples they highlight are piezoceramic actuators and more advanced voice coil motors, or VCMs.
ECMs and piezos.
Right. While they're currently used in smaller volumes compared to LRAs, their deployment is expected to grow significantly. ID TechX predicts they'll become the majority of the market by 2035.
Okay, let's break those down. How do these new VCMs differ from the LRAs we just talked about, since you said they both use voice coils?
That's a good question. While both are electromagnetic, the newer VCM designs mentioned by ID TechX are often engineered to have reduced resonance compared to LRAs.
Reduced resonance. How?
Well, it's typically achieved by modifying or even removing the internal springs that give LRAs their specific resonant frequency. This allows VCMs to be driven over a much broader range of frequencies more effectively than LRAs can.
Okay, broader range. What does that mean for the feel?
ID TechX notes this also allows VCMs to achieve higher acceleration, resulting in feedback that feels even clickier or sharper than a typical LRA tap.
So even more precise and distinct than an LRA tap, like a sharper click.
Potentially, yes, depending on the specific design. VCMs have already found some interesting early applications that really highlight these capabilities. The report mentions their use in something called haptic audio.
Haptic audio. Feeling sound.
Yeah.
That's new to me.
It's fascinating, isn't it? It's where mechanical vibration is added to enhance the perception of bass frequencies in audio. So instead of just hearing deep bass, you feel it through vibration transmitted to your body or head.
Wow. Like being at a concert.
Kind of. Companies like Woodger make wearable devices, vests, and things that use VCMs to let you feel the bass on your chest or back, almost like being next to a really powerful speaker.
Okay, I can picture that.
And gaming headsets from Corsair and Razer have also incorporated VCMs to add a physical punch to explosions, gunshots, or heavy vehicle sounds in games. It integrates touch right into the audio experience. Meta even acquired a company called Lofelt, known for designing custom VCMs used in some of Razer's haptic headsets, which really shows the industry's interest in this blend of audio and touch.
That really does blend the senses, feeling the rumble of an explosion as well as hearing it. That sounds immersive.
It absolutely is. And VCMs are also a key driver for surface haptics, particularly in those laptop trackpads we mentioned earlier, offering really high-fidelity feedback on flat surfaces. Though, as ID Techs points out, they face competition from piezoceramic actuators in that specific space.
Which brings us neatly to piezos. How do piezoceramic actuators work, and what makes them special? They sound different.
They are fundamentally different. They use the piezoelectric effect, basically. Certain materials deform very slightly when you apply an electric voltage to them, and vice versa. So, by rapidly applying and changing voltage, you can make a piezoceramic element vibrate or move very quickly and precisely. ID TechX notes that piezos offer a wide frequency response, similar to VCMs, but they can potentially achieve even higher acceleration.
Higher acceleration.
Yes, for extremely sharp, responsive feedback. This allows for what the source describes as the most refined tactile experience available today.
So if VCMs are clicky, piezos are, like, ultra clicky.
Yeah.
Super crisp.
Think of it as peak crispness and responsiveness. ID TechX highlights their key strength. They are excellent where you need to minimize actuator volume, because the piezoceramic elements themselves are very small, very thin.
Ah, sorry.
They are ideal for applications needing localized feedback from multiple actuators packed closely together, such as on a touchscreen.
Like getting distinct feedback on different icons on a car display, so you know exactly what you pressed.
Precisely. In vehicles, localized haptic confirmation on a large touchscreen is really essential for minimizing driver distraction. A small, precise click or tap right under your fingertip tells you immediately which area you interacted with without you needing to look away from the road.
And the sources mention a potential killer app for these piezoceramic actuators. What is that?
Yes, they point to Haptics solid-state buttons with localized feedback. Solid-state means there's no physical moving part for the button press itself. The feeling is entirely simulated by the haptics.
Okay, no moving parts.
Right, and piezos excel here because of that high acceleration we talked about, which provides a very crisp, very convincing simulated button feel.
Okay, but what's the killer feature that really sets them apart here? There must be more.
Beyond just the crispness, ID TechX notes something really important.
Hmm.
Certain pitot-ceramic drivers, like those developed by the Canadian company Boreas Technologies mentioned in the report, allow piezos to also act as pressure sensors.
Wait, hang on. The same component that gives you the click can also tell how hard you're pressing.
Yeah.
That's a major capability upgrade.
It absolutely is. It enables multi-stage interactions on a single touch point. The ID Tech X report gives a very relatable example, simulating the two-stage feel of a DSLR camera button.
Oh yeah, the half press to focus.
Exactly. A light half press to focus and then a firmer full press to capture the photo. This kind of interaction, enabled by Piezo's ability to provide both haptic feedback and pressure sensing, is rumored to potentially be implemented in smartphone camera buttons, like those speculated for the upcoming iPhone 16 range.
Wow.
That's a highly refined, functional, tactile experience combining simulation and sensing in one tiny component.
That really does sound like a killer app taking a familiar, functional, physical interaction and perfectly translating it to a solid-state interface, adding a whole new layer of control without moving parts.
It's a perfect illustration of how these newer technologies go beyond just adding generic feeling. They can replicate or even invent specific functional tactile responses.
So the shift is clearly towards these more premium, more capable technologies, VCMs and piezos. Why are companies investing so heavily in these when LRAs already exist and are cheaper? It seems like a big jump.
Well, ID Tech acknowledges that these emerging actuators aren't competing purely on price with LRAs today. The driving force is really their ability to significantly enhance user experience by providing richer, more precise, and more functional tactile feedback.
So it's the quality of the field.
It's the quality, but there's also potentially a system-level cost benefit.
Yeah.
As we discussed with the solid-state buttons or the thin laptop trackpads, these technologies can offer cost offsets by elimination of other components.
Ah, right, if you don't need the physical button mechanism.
Exactly. If a haptic solution eliminates the need for complex physical button mechanisms or allows for thinner, lighter designs, the overall system cost, or perhaps more importantly, the value proposition can be improved, even if the haptic component itself is more expensive than a basic LRA.
It's about the value they add to the overall product design and user interaction, not just the component price tag itself.
Precisely. And the market forecast strongly supports this whole trend. ID Tech X predicts that by 2035, these emerging actuators, VCMs, and piezos will command over 50% of the total haptics market share.
Over half the market. Wow.
This isn't some niche trend, it's a fundamental shift in the industry, pointing towards a future where more sophisticated, refined touch experiences are commonplace across a wide array of devices.
It's quite a leap from that simple vibrating motor to touch points that can sense pressure and simulate the feel of complex physical buttons.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
The journey of touch tech is definitely accelerating, and these newer actuators are really driving that forward momentum.
So let's pivot a bit. Let's talk about where many of us likely experience haptics most directly in our hands, specifically when we're gaming. What does all this evolution of touch mean for how you interact with your favorite games?
Oh, gaming is perhaps the most consumer-facing application where haptics directly and dramatically impacts the user experience. Tech4 Gamers and the Ergonomics study both frame haptics in gaming as turning the interaction into a two-way street.
What do you mean by two-way? How's that work?
Well, traditionally, your interaction with a game controller is mostly one-way. You provide input, pressing buttons, moving sticks, right?
Yeah, I tell the game what to do.
Exactly. With haptics, the game can send information back to you through tactile sensations in the controller. It's an additional communication channel that significantly enhances immersion and realism.
Ah, so the game is physically reacting to what's happening on screen, and you're actually feeling it in your hands.
Precisely. The sources highlight how this tactile feedback can increase user immersion tenfold, which is a huge claim, but the examples back it up.
Tenfold. Wow.
The Tech4 Gamers article provides some fantastic examples, many drawn from Sony's PlayStation DualSense controller implementation, which really pushed this forward.
Yeah.
You can feel environmental textures, sensations mimicking walking through cold water, traversing slippery ice, or even the distinct pattern of raindrops falling on your character.
Feeling raindrops.
Yeah. The Astrobot examples described in the article, like feeling the texture of sand versus grass through the controller as you walk, are great illustrations of this kind of environmental feedback.
That really helps ground you in the virtual world, doesn't it? It's not just seeing the rain. You're physically feeling the simulated impact, however subtle.
And it extends to actions and consequences, too. With the DualSense 5, the sources describe feeling the tension of weapon recoil or the resistance of pulling brakes in a racing game through those adaptive triggers.
The triggers push back.
Yeah, they can provide variable resistance. The Tech4Gamers article gives specific examples from Call of Duty. Black Ops Cold War feeling the difference in the R2 trigger tension when reloading different weapons. Like, the light snap of a pistol feels different from the heavier pull required for a rifle reload.
That's specific.
Very specific. Or feeling the pressure build as you prepare to throw a grenade in Ratchet and Clank. It's not just a generic rumble anymore. It's a distinct feeling tied to a specific action or weapon type.
Those specific details are powerful. You're getting physical feedback that's layered and meaningful, not just shaking.
Exactly. You're getting physical feedback that's nuanced. And research actually supports the impact of this. Studies cited by Tech4Gamers show high percentages of participants reporting enhanced game immersion due to haptics figures like 77% and 8 out of 10 are mentioned.
So people notice it and value it.
Definitely. And haptics can also provide functional cues, like a specific vibration pattern alerting you that you're drifting off-road in a racing game, allowing you to react without needing to glance at a mini-map or indicator.
Beyond just immersion, the ergonomics study, we looked at frames haptic feedback as a critical human factor in perception and feedback for gamepads. What does that mean?
Right. The study looks at the overall design of game controllers, not just haptics, but identifies haptics as essential alongside audio and visual feedback for contributing to the player's total experience and, importantly, their efficiency in operating the game.
So it affects how well you play.
Potentially, yes. A well-designed gamepad, the study suggests, considers a blend of factors. Physical comfort, intuitive layout, flexibility for different hand sizes, and accurate, well-tuned feedback, including haptics that matches the game type and platform characteristics. It all works together.
So good haptics isn't just a standalone feature. It's part of a broader design effort to make the controller feel natural, intuitive, and, well, effective. Part of the whole package.
Absolutely. It's an integral part of the physical interface between the player and the game. You can't really separate it out.
Now, here's where we get into a fascinating real-world wrinkle, highlighted by that Reddit thread we looked at. Could all this enhanced immersion and realism actually be a disadvantage in competitive gaming? You know, where every millisecond and tiny movement counts.
Ah, yes, the Reddit discussion. This is great because it's a very candid look at how users, particularly those focused on peak performance, are weighing the pros and cons of haptics in the real world. It definitely brings up the potential downsides.
What are the main arguments presented on Reddit for haptics being a disadvantage in competitive play? What are people saying?
Well, several players feel it's simply distracting. One user actually described it as the controller fighting you when you're trying to execute precise movements or rapid inputs.
Fighting you.
Yeah, like the resistance from adaptive triggers or intense rumble effects can potentially affect reaction times. Some feel it could build fatigue faster in your fingers or hands during long competitive sessions. And crucially, sometimes the haptic implementation in a specific game might just be poorly done or feel excessive, not well balanced.
That makes intuitive sense. I mean, if the controller's physically pushing back against your trigger pull, it could potentially slow down your rate of fire compared to just a simple switch activation.
Exactly. The example directly given in the thread relates to the trigger tension potentially affecting the rate of fire for characters like Ash in Overwatch. If you need to apply more force or move your finger further because of the adaptive trigger resistance, it might take fractions of a second longer than a light button press. And in competitive play, as you said, those fractions matter.
Okay, so that's the case against haptics for some competitive players. What about the arguments for keeping it on, or at least keeping certain aspects of it turned on?
Well, the most common reason given, even among competitive players, is simply that it's more enjoyable and immersive. For many, the fun factor outweighs a potential slight performance penalty. They just like it.
Fair enough.
But there's also a key distinction made, particularly regarding PlayStation's DualSense controller. Users clarify that the adaptive triggers specifically can sometimes provide genuinely useful tactical information about weapons or character states.
Useful tactical information from a feeling. How does that work? What kind of info?
Examples given include feeling a subtle clack or a change in resistance in the trigger when a character like Anna in Overwatch switches from projectile to hit scan mode while she's scoped in.
Okay, a mode switch indicator.
Right. Or feeling the distinct tension buildup that indicates how charged up a shot is for characters like Ash or Widowmaker. This tactile feedback provides an additional immediate signal about the weapon's state that might be less obvious from just visual or audio cues, especially in the heat of a chaotic match.
So it's not just cosmetic. It can actually provide tangible gameplay information right to your fingertips.
Exactly. For some players, getting that immediate tactile confirmation or timing cue is worth the potential slight impact on raw input speed. The Reddit thread really highlights this trade-off. Is the potential tactical information or the satisfaction gained worth a possible micro delay or distraction?
It really sounds like there's no single answer here. It might depend heavily on the specific game, the quality of the haptic implementation, and maybe the player's personal preference and skill level.
Absolutely. That seems to be the takeaway. The consensus among many on Reddit seems to be that while haptics, particularly general rumble or maybe overly aggressive adaptive triggers, might be a slight competitive disadvantage in very specific scenarios for the absolute top-tier players. Overall player skill is still the overwhelming factor.
So it's not making or breaking careers.
Probably not for most. For most players, the haptic effect likely isn't the deciding factor between winning and losing. The debate really underscores the point made back in the Tech4Gamers article. The key to successful haptics is finding the correct balance. If it's overdone, intrusive, or poorly implemented, it becomes annoying and counterproductive, potentially turning players off, especially those focused on performance.
So the competitive gaming discussion isn't just about haptics being good or bad, but really about the nuances of implementation and how it balances immersion, potential tactical information, and pure input performance. That's a real challenge for game developers, I imagine.
Exactly. It shows that the feel of a game and its interface is a really complex design space with trade-offs everywhere.
Shifting gears pretty dramatically now, let's move into the world of virtual reality. If haptics is important for grounding you in a game on a flat screen, it feels like it would be even more critical in a fully immersive VR environment, right? To make it feel real.
Oh, absolutely. As the VR Crab study makes very clear, haptics plays a vital role in making those virtual environments feel real, tangible, and physically present. You see and hear the virtual world, sure, but being able to feel it adds a whole new, crucial layer of presence and immersion. It helps trick your brain.
And the specific study we have here focuses on a really interesting, less explored area, feeling part of a large virtual gathering or crowd. Not just touching an object, but being in a crowd.
That's right. Much of the VR haptics research to date has looked at simulating interactions with objects or maybe one-on-one contact with other avatars. But the study notes that real-life crowd interactions aren't just about sharing space visually. They frequently involve physical contact, like bumping into someone as you navigate a packed area.
Yeah, happens all the time.
Right. And simulating that specific physical aspect of a crowd is technically complex and, importantly, less understood in terms of its impact on the user.
And this particular study investigated the impact of kinesthetic haptics, which, remind me, is about simulating forces and resistance, not just vibration.
Exactly. Force feedback.
On emotional responses, specifically in crowded VR scenarios.
Precisely. They wanted to go beyond simple tactile cues, the buzzes and taps, and see how simulating the physical force of, say, a shoulder collision affected participants emotionally and perceptually within a virtual crowd.
Okay, let's look at their setup because it sounds complicated. How did they even begin to simulate something like a shoulder collision?
They took a very deliberate, engineering-led approach. They designed wearable haptic devices intended to be worn on the shoulder, specifically to simulate a collision event.
A shoulder bump simulator.
Pretty much. To figure out what kind of force was needed, they modeled a shoulder collision between two people as an inelastic collision-like. They stick together for a moment between two 30-kilogram masses, one moving at 1.7 meters per second, colliding at an 85-degree angle over about 188 milliseconds.
Wow. Specific physics.
Very specific. Based on that physics model, they aimed to simulate an impulsive force, a quick hit, in the range of roughly 23.6 to 26.1 newtons. The diagram in the source showing the collision vector is quite illustrative of their physical modeling approach. They really tried to ground it in reality.
So they did the math first to define the target physical sensation. What did the actual prototype device look like and do? Was it bulky?
Their prototype device, which weighed about 520 grams, so a bit over a pound, noticeable but not huge, combined 3 different haptic modules. It used a linear actuator, LA, to provide a simple poking sensation.
Okay.
Yeah. It included an eccentric rotating mass, ERM, yes, the old school vibrator we talked about, specifically for a general single vibration cue, just a buzz.
So useful, maybe.
Apparently. And most significantly, it incorporated a collision haptic device, or CHD. This CHD used a flywheel and a brake mechanism to generate a stronger, impulsive torque that translated into the desired force feedback sensation at the shoulder, mimicking that bump or collision. The diagrams and photos in the source show how these different modules were integrated into the shoulder-worn prototype.
Interesting that they still used an ERM alongside the newer tech for a specific effect. And they tested different combinations of these, right? Not just the full collision.
Yes, exactly. They evaluated 3 distinct haptic conditions for participants. No haptic, so just seeing and hearing the crowd. Then tactile stimulus, which used only the LA and ERM for lighter pokes and vibrations synced to visual
A
collision.
little gentler version.
Right. And finally, haptic stimulus, which used all 3 modules, the LA, the ERM, and the collision haptic device to deliver both the lighter tactile cues and the stronger impulsive collision force feedback. The full experience.
And how did they create the virtual crowd environment for the study? Were they interacting with avatars?
No, they used pre-recorded 360-degree videos of real-world crowds, which participants viewed through a MetaQuest 2 headset. They had 2 distinct types of crowd scenarios captured on video. A casual crowd, which is less dense, people move slower, fewer bumps. And then an aggressive crowd, which is much denser, people move faster, and featured more visual instances of people bumping into each other.
Okay, pre-recorded, but different intensities.
Right. And crucially, they synced the visual collision events happening in the 360 videos precisely with the activation of the haptic devices worn by the participants. So when you saw someone bump into the camera's perspective, you felt it on your shoulder. The source includes images of these distinct crowd videos and a timeline diagram illustrating exactly how they synced the haptics to the video events.
Okay, so participants strapped on the shoulder device, put on the VR headset, watched these real crowd videos, and felt perfectly synced haptic sensations depending on the condition. They had 20 participants, mostly male, right? What did they find regarding emotional responses? Did feeling bumps make people happy?
Correct. 20 adults, mostly male, aged 20-35, participated. After experiencing the scenarios under each haptic condition, they filled out questionnaires rating their emotional state, things like nervousness, comfort, pleasantness, and also their perception of the touch itself, like its realism.
And the findings?
The findings on emotional response were quite revealing, and no, it didn't make them happy. Participants reported significantly increased levels of nervousness whenever any haptic stimulus was present, both the tactile and the full haptic conditions, compared to the no haptic condition.
Okay, so any touch made them more nervous.
Yes, and this was consistent regardless of whether they were in the casual or the more aggressive crowd video. Feeling unexpected contact just triggered nervousness.
That makes sense. I mean, feeling bumped into, even virtually, probably triggers a natural, cautious, or, nervous response. We don't generally like being bumped.
Exactly. And related to that, ratings for comfort and pleasantness were negatively associated with both the tactile and haptic stimulus conditions compared to having no haptics at all. It's simply less comfortable to feel like you're being jostled, even if it's not a hard impact.
So the haptics clearly evoked negative feelings like nervousness and discomfort. But what about the intended effect realism and feeling like you were actually in the crowd?
This is where the key insight lies. The sense of touch realism was significantly enhanced by the haptics. And critically, it was the full haptic stimulus condition, the one that included the stronger, impulsive force feedback from the CHD that delivered the highest perception of realism compared to just the lighter, tactile stimulus from the poke and buzz.
So the force feedback made it feel more real.
Participants felt the touch was more like a real collision when that force feedback was included. It felt more convincing.
Okay, so more realistic haptics meant more realism in the feel of the touch itself. But what about the feeling of actually being part of the crowd, the immersion?
And this is perhaps the most compelling finding of the whole study. The haptic stimulus condition, the full force feedback one, had the most significant positive influence on identification with the crowd.
Identification, what does that mean exactly?
What that means is that participants felt more like they were truly part of the group, blended in with the crowd, more present in that crowd, especially when experiencing the denser, faster, aggressive crowd scenario with the full force feedback.
Wow. Okay, wait. So even though it made them feel more nervous and less comfortable, the presence of realistic force feedback from simulated collisions actually made them feel more like they belonged in that virtual environment, more identified with the crowd. That is incredibly counterintuitive and fascinating.
It truly is, isn't it? It suggests that for the human brain, accurately simulating the physical realities of an environment Even the slightly negative or uncomfortable ones, like accidental bumps in a crowd, is a powerful driver for creating a sense of presence and belonging, or what they call identification. It's not just about making VR experiences pleasant. It might be more about making them feel real, authentically real, even if that reality includes minor discomforts we experience all the time. This finding is a huge insight for designing VR experiences where social presence or navigating physical interactions is important.
This study has implications way beyond just simulating crowds then.
Absolutely. The authors suggest the outcome could directly inform the design of more effective VR systems and maybe future emotion rendering engines. Imagine using this principle in VR training simulations.
Like for emergency responders.
Exactly. For first responders navigating chaotic scenes, or maybe even for therapeutic applications dealing with social anxieties, where feeling physical interactions, even slightly negative ones, is crucial for creating realistic scenarios or evoking specific emotional responses for treatment. It suggests haptics can be used to evoke complex emotional states, not just simple sensations.
It really highlights the power of touch to affect our emotional and psychological response to digital environments, blurring the lines between virtual and physical presence in really unexpected ways. Feeling uncomfortable can make it feel more real.
It adds a depth, a sort of visceral reality to VR that sight and sound alone just can't fully achieve.
The study was groundbreaking, clearly,
Yeah.
but they did note limitations, as any good research does.
Yeah.
What were the main ones?
Right. They were upfront about several. The prototype device itself had a minimum delay of about 7 seconds between rapid successive collisions, meaning it couldn't perfectly simulate very dense rapid jostling like you might get in a mosh pit or something.
Okay, a technical limitation.
Yeah. There's also the inherent challenge with wearable haptics delivering forces to a specific point on the body, like just the shoulder, can sometimes feel unnatural compared to a full body interaction where the force might propagate differently. They also only focused on shoulder collisions, nothing else. They relied on subjective feedback via questionnaires, which always has limitations, and the participant demographic was limited, especially lacking gender diversity, mostly young men.
And they suggest ways to improve this in future research. What's next?
Yes, they recommend incorporating objective measures of emotional response, like monitoring physiological signals, heart rate, breath rate, maybe skin conductance, sweat response.
Some biometric data.
Exactly, which can provide less biased data than self-reports. They also suggest moving to more dynamic 3D virtual environments where collisions are generated interactively based on user movement, rather than just watching pre-recorded 360 videos.
Make it truly interactive.
Right. Exploring haptic interactions on different body parts is another step, and further investigating the specific link between haptics and co-presence, that feeling that other virtual entities, avatars, or agents are real and nearby, are also identified as crucial next steps.
This study really is a fantastic example of how haptics research is pushing into simulating nuanced physical and social interactions in VR, showing its potential to go way beyond just a basic vibration or tap.
It demonstrates that simulating physical contact, even sometimes discomforting contact, can be a surprisingly powerful tool for creating a sense of realism and belonging in virtual worlds. It's quite profound, really.
So pulling together everything we've discussed, the massive market growth, the technological leap from simple buzzes to precise pressure-sensitive feedback, the impact on gaming immersion versus the competitive edge debate, and the surprising emotional power of touch in VR, where is haptics ultimately heading? What does the future of feel look like according to these sources?
Well, we know from ID TechX that the market forecast points towards that significant shift by 2035, with VCMs and piezos expected to dominate over half the market share. So technologically, the trend is clear.
More advanced tech.
Right. This isn't just about adding more haptics, it's about deploying more refined, localized, and higher fidelity tactile experiences becoming commonplace across a much wider range of devices than we see today.
So better quality touch feedback everywhere, more seamlessly integrated into things.
Exactly. And the ergonomic study, while it was centered on gamepads, offers broader insights into design principles that are crucial for the future of haptics in any device. They really emphasize the importance of improving design by focusing on user experience and ergonomic comfort.
Making it feel good to use.
Yes, ensuring the haptic feedback feels good, feels natural, and works intuitively within the physical context of the device, whether that's a controller, a car dashboard, a phone, or a wearable. They also point to potential standardization across platforms where it makes sense, simplifying interfaces, and critically, continuously incorporating user feedback into the design process. Listen to the users.
Simple principles maybe, but absolutely critical for adoption and user satisfaction in the long run.
Absolutely. They also highlight the transformative impact of emerging technologies like VR and AR, mentioning devices like PlayStation VR and Apple Vision Pro specifically. These immersive platforms demand haptic design that is seamlessly integrated and feels appropriate for simulated objects and interactions in a 3D or augmented space. That VR crowd study we just discussed is a perfect example of the kind of research needed to understand haptics in these complex new environments.
And the ergonomics study also suggests other tech influencing haptics in the future.
Yes, they mentioned gesture recognition and advancements in touchscreen technology could lead to more diverse and flexible haptic experiences. And quite excitingly, they suggest that AI and machine learning could play a significant role,
AI in haptics. How?
potentially enabling more intelligent, context-aware, and even personalized haptic feedback in the future. Imagine haptics that learns your preferences over time and provides feedback tailored specifically to how you interact with a device or what you're doing at that particular moment.
A smart, intuitive touch system that adapts to you? That sounds pretty cool.
The potential for personalized tactile interaction is huge. One source we looked at, Wayline, captures the essence of this whole evolution by explicitly calling it the haptic revolution.
The haptic revolution. Sounds like we're really at a turning point then.
It certainly feels that way based on these sources. And that same source ends with a very powerful, almost poignant call to action. Let's build it right.
Let's build it right.
Uh,
What does that phrase imply, especially given everything we've discussed today, the potential downsides, the complexities?
I think it implies that the potential for haptics to profoundly change how we interact with technology is vast. But it's not a given that this revolution will be successful or universally beneficial. Simply slapping vibration motors into more devices isn't going to cut it. Building it right means thoughtful design, which, drawing from the ergonomic study and the VR research we talked about, means deeply understanding human perception, considering ergonomic comfort, carefully balancing immersion with practicality like we saw in the gaming debate, and even grappling with the complex emotional impact of touch, as the VR crowd study showed. It means ensuring these new tactile experiences are intuitive, comfortable, genuinely enhance the user experience, and provide real value, not just add another layer of potentially annoying stimulus.
It sounds like the technology is advancing rapidly, the hardware is getting there, but the real challenge now is ensuring the human element, our perception, our comfort, our needs, is at the center of its application.
Absolutely. Getting the feel right requires just as much attention, maybe even more nuance than getting the visuals or audio right. And that demands a deep understanding of how we humans perceive and react to touch in both the physical and the digital realms.
So wrapping things up then, we started this deep dive talking about that familiar little phone buzz, that basic controller rumble we all know. But our exploration today, guided by these diverse sources, has shown us that haptics is anything but simple. It's a technology undergoing a rapid, sophisticated evolution,
Yeah.
moving into refined actuators like VCMs and piezos that are set to enhance experiences in everything from the dashboards of cars and the trackpads of laptops to high-fidelity gaming and incredibly complex virtual reality environments.
We've traced the journey from basic vibration to precise layered force feedback. We've seen how haptics is a potential game changer for immersion, while also sparking that nuanced debate among competitive players about its practical impact. Is it useful info or a distraction? And we've even delved into that groundbreaking research showing how simulating physical touch, like a simple bump in a crowd, can make virtual social interactions feel more real, evoke powerful emotional responses like nervousness, yet paradoxically increase our sense of belonging within that digital space. It's fascinating stuff.
And this technology isn't some distant future concept reserved just for enthusiasts or research labs. These sources make it pretty clear that haptics is becoming a bigger, more integrated, and definitely more sophisticated part of your daily interactions with devices, making them potentially more intuitive, more informative, and more deeply immersive than ever before.
The potential for touch to reshape our digital world is immense, and the technology is certainly advancing to meet that potential. The haptic revolution, as one source termed it, is either fully upon us now or perhaps still waiting for us as designers and users to figure out how to truly build it right.
Which leaves us with this final thought for you to consider as you go about your day, maybe feeling the buzz of your phone or the texture of your trackpad. If haptic technology can make you feel like you're genuinely part of a virtual crowd, even evoking feelings like nervousness while simultaneously increasing your sense of belonging, How else might we use touch to blur the lines between the digital and physical worlds? And what are the broader implications? The exciting possibilities for deeper connections, maybe better understanding, but also perhaps the potential challenges we need to navigate for how we experience technology and ultimately interact with each other through it in the future.
Something to feel your way through, indeed.
Absolutely. That's all for this deep dive.
Until next time.